you don't.
We do say 1-2 because this is Set the Table episode 12. I am John, and with me as always is Jack.
How's it going, eh?
And this is episode 12. We're going to be talking about outcomes for bad rolls on this, the podcast where we talk about tabletop role-playing games and improving your DM/GM skills. We start off with a recap of our adventures from the past week. So Jack, why don't you go first? What did you play?
I played 2 games. We finished up our Monster of the Week adventure, and it went well. We concluded successfully. Nobody died. We found the monster and beat it. Monster of the Week is I don't know, kind of a 1980s style horror. Kids in middle school confronting monsters, that kind of thing. It was a little challenging for me to play because it was set in the 1980s, and that brought up lots of memories about what was like back then. And the group I was playing with, they weren't born in the they weren't even born in the 1980s. So there was a little bit of a culture like, oh, hey, we're gonna go do this, and it's like, no, in the 1980s, doesn't exist here. That doesn't exist, or things like, so in the 1980s, that's when a lot of the blue laws were being rescinded. So in a lot of states, you couldn't buy alcohol on Sunday. Like, there's a couple states still where that's true, but that was much more prevalent in the 1980s kind of thing. So. Just different, like, oh, hey, we're gonna go talk to this person. It's like, you'd never go do that. Why? No, what? So just weird stuff like that. And I was playing a pre-gen character, which is hit or miss for me.
Yeah.
But it was good. I had a good time. It was fun. It was just a little challenging to try to put myself back in that mindset.
Right.
And then our 5e game, more hijinks and double crossing and tracking people down. We're trying to build a small army to take on another group of people and kick them out of their house. There's a brothel being run by a succubus that Del Rey wants as her headquarters, so we're trying to figure out how many fighters we need to send in there to kick the succubuses out. So
fun stuff.
Very fun stuff. Yep.
I love hearing about her.
So what did you play?
My group played 5e. They have concluded the battle at the volcanic caldera, stopped a ritual that had potential to end the world, went back to the city where they were sort of working out of, got some rewards. The king threw them a feast celebration day. They did some shopping at an eccentric enchanter who they seemed to enjoy, and they started making strides towards their next goals, which is Connie, the human bard of the group, received an animal messenger in the form of a butterfly after the battle at the caldera had concluded and the winds had died down and animals and birds and things were starting to be seen again, asking him to return to meet with somebody who he had worked for back in Prosperous. And he had left the city originally because he had gotten mixed up in an assassination attempt, and then had his friends and acquaintances start being mysteriously poisoned or otherwise disappeared in sort of indirect ways. So he bounced, tried to find some peace and quiet, and that's sort of when the party found him. And he hasn't really had that since, but now he has to go back, and it's going to be good. I've got quite a bit of lore for the city of Prosperous and its surrounding area. So it's going to be, I don't know, it'll be different going from wide open world places to city and the web of lies and intrigue that exists there. So definitely a change of pace, but I think it will be good.
Very cool.
So last time we talked about fudging rolls, and part of determining what happens with rolls is dealing with outcomes for bad rolls, and how you as a DM can make them make sense and be punishing in a realistic way that is both narratively and realistic in terms of the world appropriate, without just being punitive and unfun. But before we get into our deep conversation, because I think per the notes some of the answers here are going to sort of segue into that, we had a patron question from one of our listeners who asks, it's a question for you, who asks, what do you look for in a perfect PC, and what has influenced and changed that over the years? So I'm going to let you run away with this one, and I'll jump in when I need to.
Okay. Well, I'll give it a shot. So, first of all, I won't denigrate the concept of a perfect PC because, but there are some PCs that I really enjoy playing. I don't know if I'd call them perfect, but they're fun and engaging, and I connect with them. And then there are a lot of characters that I roll, characters and NPCs that just fall flat. I don't connect with their story. I don't relate to them as characters. They're just not fun to play. And I think that's different for all players. Like, and thinking about when I was thinking about this question, I thought about TV shows. And you watch a TV show, and everybody loves this character. It's like, oh, that character's the best. And I just like, oh God, something just rubs me the wrong way about that character. And it's just, oh, I don't want to watch this show, or, I'll watch the show, but that, everybody's, oh, this guy's so great. It's like, nah, no, they're not.
Or NPCs that you build when you're DMing that your PCs love but you don't, or vice versa.
Sure, you spend a lot of time crafting this NPC, and they're pivotal to the game, and
Fireball.
The players like meet them, don't get on well with them, and they're like, oh God, we gotta cart this guy around. Oh man. Or you make the random shopkeeper that all of a sudden is the central plot to your adventure. And your whole session turns into a how do we move boxes around a warehouse for Freddy, because Freddy's our favorite shopkeeper. But I guess the way I kind of approach this is I laid out kind of the steps that I've taken with successful characters.
Sure. So you've talked about Dolrea quite a bunch on the show. Would you consider her one of your successful characters?
I think Dolrea is probably a successful character. Yep. The clone, and as far as NPCs go, YH3A-1 is a clone from Paranoia, and that was really, really successful. That he I don't think we ever assigned a gender. He just kept saying yeah. He was an infrared clone, so they're heavily drugged and they have really crummy jobs, and they basically hot rack with somebody else. So they're working 12 hours a day, sleeping and eating and kind of re-drugging themselves 12 hours a day. But so I kind of listed out the steps. Basically, I think about the system that I'm playing and the group that I'm playing with. So that's kind of the first thing when I sit down and I'm going to roll a character for this to play with this group, and we're playing whatever it is. Monarchies of Mao. Okay, cool. I'm going to make a cat, and what kind of cat do I want to be? that's kind of the next thing is like, what do I want to play, and what would I be comfortable playing for a while? Like if this character lives for a whole year worth of real time playing, am I going to still be happy with this character after, you know, what is that, 50-ish, 40-ish game sessions?
Yeah, ideally at least, but
Right.
scheduling.
And yeah, just if, you know, some characters are great to play for like a couple of sessions, and then it's not so bad if they get mulched or go away or something happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
And other characters, it's like, you know, I really want to keep playing this one and see what happens. So after I kind of have that stuff worked out in my head, or usually I'm doing this on a scratch piece of paper, um, I'll just start to think of a narrative flashback. Like before I've even picked class, I'll start with a writing prompt. Like this character is at the end of the day, and right before they drift off to sleep, they recall a time in their past where they did blah, or
Interesting.
or yeah, we're walking from this place to this place, and I'm daydreaming. What are they and they're daydreaming about something that happened in their past. What are they daydreaming about? So I'll basically we used to do this in college for my undergrad in creative writing. You just have a writing prompt and you write as fast as you can for 5 to 7 minutes, and that's my prompt. Like it's the end of the day, and I'm brushing my horse, and I'm thinking about that time that I blah, and then I'll just start writing.
Very cool. I liked those sort of writing prompts in school too.
And it doesn't have to. I mean, sometimes they turn into many pages, and sometimes it's just a couple of paragraphs.
Mm-hmm. Just to get the juices flowing about that character.
And then based on the system, the next bullet I have is connect to canon. So with Dulrea, actually Dulrea is a supporting cast member for a backstory for a different character altogether. And that character's backstory turned into this, it's not really novel, probably novella length story. And she was just one of the kind of bit players in that story, but she was interesting. And I picked her up and started running with her. But if you can connect it to canon, so we're playing 5e, we're playing in Faerun. Neblins are the dark gnomes, right, from the Underdark.
Mm-hmm.
And Dulrea was an accountant for a matron mother, a drow matron mother. So, of course, I pull out all of my R.A. Salvatore and my 3.5 source books for the Underdark and Menzo Baronzon, and I think I based the drow family more on Lisa Smedman's work in the War of the Spider Queen novel series. But anyway, I started, this is a real drow house. This is they're outside Ched Nazad. They do these things, blah, blah, blah. So she's got real connections to the mythology, the mythos, if you will. And then I think about a raison d'etre, which is a big French fancy word.
I was going to say, for us non-French folks,
a reason to be. Why? What's driving this character? What do they want to do with their life? What do they want to do when they grow up? Are they happy with what they're doing now? And then once I've got all of that kind of worked out on my scratch pad, then and only then will I look at class, caste, clan, job. What's the Starfinder, like that's when I'll say, okay, based on all of this feels like a bard, or this feels like a cleric, or this feels like usually an envoy if we're playing Starfinder, right?
Sure.
Whatever the system is, that's where I'll fit them into kind of what goes on, and then after that, I'll start looking at stats.
Sure, you're a theme first, mechanics after kind of
I
developer.
am, and as we said, I'm a bit of a method actor. I'm a bit of a tactician, and this really helps me kind of get into that mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't do this with all games, right? If I'm playing DCC or MCC, I just roll my 4 chumps for the funnel and we shove them into the meat grinder.
Right, but you still like it's much less backstory development in those. But even with that funnel, as you play those characters, you sort of develop all of these things over the course of the funnel. And then if you're left with 2 of them, then you know I did that a little bit, dug a little bit deeper for them, but writing 4 PCs where there's a pretty good chance 2 or 3 of them are going to die in the first 2 hours is it's not a waste, but that's a lot of energy that could have been spent on a character that you will get to play for a longer time.
Right. So then I started thinking about the so that's how I arrive at characters that I enjoy playing, right?
Yeah, your version of the perfect PC.
My version of the perfect PC, right? I followed this process, and I've gotten some really great characters that I enjoyed playing. I followed this process, and I got a character. I really liked the character. I saved him off someplace so I can come back to him.
Mm-hmm.
But just did not work in Tomb of Annihilation. It was just a complete, just no bueno. It failed on he failed on so many levels.
It wasn't fun.
It wasn't fun, right? It's like, okay, here I am. We're getting close to the boss fight. I played a gunslinger pirate, no magic weapons, so I'm doing half damage to every monster leading up to the boss fight, and it's like, so I feel about as useful as teats on a bull. So let's do something different. And yeah, I talked to my DM, and we were kind of in the middle of a fight, and it's like, so I kind of want to go out in a blaze of glory. Can I bring a new character in, or do you want me to sit out while everybody kind of wraps up the story? And he's like, no, you can bring a new character in. But I was kind of done playing that character. And I followed all these steps. I have beautiful backstory, right? Washed out to sea near Luskin as a dwarf foundling, attempted to be raised by mermaids until they realized that the child wasn't going to survive, and then cast up in a fishing net on a fishing trawler and turned into a cabin boy. And that's how I got a dwarf gunslinger who's a pirate.
Nice. And that's like, for all of, we made it, not we, you make it seem like that process is a lot of time and can be, a lot of effort for somebody who might be new to a tabletop game, or a DM who wants to write, meaningful backstories for their characters. They may not go through all of this, but that summary right there, 2 sentences to describe what is, a pretty unique and interesting background for a character. It doesn't have to be this long process. If you get something like that and it really works, then you check all the boxes. You just check them very quickly.
Yes.
But it works, and he was definitely an interesting character.
Interesting character, just didn't fit the adventure we were on.
Right. Right.
So then the second part of the question is what influenced and changed over the years. And so I'm older than dirt. I've been RPG playing.
You're not older than dirt.
I'm older than some dirt. If
Maybe
you look at
some dirt.
Some dirt. Okay. So it's been about 40 years, give or take, that I've been playing tabletop RPGs. I started in the late 70s, and I kind of have chunked up because things have changed over time, right? In the 1980s, I was in high school, and I had a different world perspective, and I had different influences. So that's kind of how I've chopped it up. I chopped it up by decade, and I'll just run quickly through um, like where I was and what started and what were my influences and some example characters that kind of fit that perfect PC mold.
Sure. And
So
this
we'll
is
start
sort
out.
of the Jack Skoda version. This is like your Appendix N.
Kind of, yeah. It's also kind of my version of Shannon Appleklein's Designers and Dragons book series, or my personal journey through that. Those books are fabulous for folks that like kind of the history of the industry and where different authors came from and went to and why some companies don't exist anymore and that kind of thing. Those books are fabulous. But all right, so here's the rundown.
Yeah, go for it.
So we'll start in the 1980s. When I made characters in the 1980s, systems. I was playing AD&D, Classic Traveler, Gamma World, Ghostbusters, Gangbusters. I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting something. No, that's it. So no connection to party. I would read through the book and say, that character's cool. I'm going to make one of those. As far as player character motivations or motivations for playing the game myself, in the 80s, it was all about power, nobility, and chivalry for me. And as far as influences go, Lloyd Alexander, those books are fabulous. That's the Black Cauldron series. There's 5 of those books. Fritz Lieber, that's Great Fafford and the Grey Mouser. Arthurian Legends, Lord of the Rings. I call it real Battlestar Galactica, but the original Battlestar Galactica. Star Wars had come out in that time frame, and then some of the late 70s, early 80s dystopian future, Logan's Run, and then Circle of Iron. That's a David Carradine movie based off a Bruce Lee plot. So that's what I was reading, and that's kind of the things that I was into. And as far as an example goes, one of my longest lived characters was a chaotic good drow cavalier. We had played the G series against the Giants, which then leads to the D series. These are TSR Dungeons and Dragons modules. That's Descent into the Underdark, D1, D2, D3, and then the Q1 is Queen of the Demon Web Pit. So you fight the giants, you level up, you go into the Underdark, you fight drow elves, you level up, and then you go into the Abyss and you kick the crap out of Lolth, and it's the end of the story. And so I picked a drow cavalier who's basically going back to repay the females for their misdeeds.
You liked drow before drow were cool.
I liked drow before the first Drizzt book hit. Yes. I did not play them the same way that Ed Greenwood and R.A. Salvatore wrote them, but it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So we get into the 1990s. So that's 80s. We get into the 90s, and then in the 90s, I shifted gears from fantasy to World of Darkness, like a lot of people did, right? Vampire the Masquerade came out in 90, 91, 92, and everybody shifted to Vampire, or my groups that I played with shifted to Vampire, werewolf, mage, that kind of thing. So in the 90s, when I started making characters, I would look for affiliation by race, clan, or goal, right? So,
yeah, I mean, lots
tribe,
of
right?
the World of Darkness stuff is very clan based.
It's very
like your class is a clan, basically,
right? Or a tribe. In the case of my favorite character from this era, I played a werewolf who was a glasswalker. Those are the urban werewolves, and he was a financier, and he was basically trying to uh, buy and freeze companies that were contributing to the worm. So, for those not familiar with Werewolf the Apocalypse from White Wolf Games, you're a werewolf, and there's this thing called the worm, and it's destroying Mother Nature, and it's, big corporations and global warming and pollution and all that stuff. And you, as the werewolves, are fighting it. It's a losing battle. You're going to lose. Um, the world is ending, but you're raging against the dying of the light, so to speak. So that was he was VT. He basically just had two initials for his name, but that was his jam. He would work with the other werewolves and work with Wall Street and try to buy things and freeze accounts, and every once in a while he'd wolf out and kill somebody, but it was a good time. As far as influences go, that was kind of, again, with the shift to World of Darkness, Anne Rice, Poppy Z. Bright, Nancy Collins, Edgar Rice Burroughs, a little bit of Jules Verne in there as well, and H.G. Wells. So turn towards the vampire stuff, right?
Yeah, makes sense for the 90s, yeah. Too.
There's no Stephanie Meyer in there, okay? So not twinkly vampires, right? I mean, if you read any of Poppy Z. Bright stuff, that's very, very dark. Some of that poetry is pretty. Yeah, it's good poetry. It's just very.
I haven't heard that name before, so I'll have to do some research.
Yeah, I have paperbacks downstairs somewhere, but. So that was those the 90s. In the 2000s, I GM'd a lot for young children. So that kind of, I didn't really play. I wasn't really playing at that point. I was teaching a group of people. One of them is you, John.
Yep.
So I did a lot of GMing, didn't do a lot of playing, and I did also kind of shifted more towards video games, right? So Assassin's Creed, Dragon Age, who doesn't love Dragon Age, right? Skyrim, all those kinds of things.
Little early for Skyrim, but yeah, you're playing a lot of World of Warcraft in the 2000s.
In the 2000s, there was a lot of World of Warcraft, and Pirates of the Burning Sea was another one that popped out. Yeah. Trying to think of other, but yeah. So, and it wasn't until closer to the tens that I started playing again, and that's when I kind of shifted to a role or story fit. So if I'm making a character, right, bullet number one is what system and what's the group. So then I started thinking about, okay, with this group, this is the kind of character that's going to be fun to play. With that group over there, they're a little bit more raunchy, right? When my group out in Ohio, we're all in our 50s. We're not playing with any little kids. And we know each other fairly well, and we kind of know where everybody's lines are for what you can get away with and what you can't get away with, and we're a little bit more racist if we're playing. I mean, if we're playing Call of Cthulhu and it's the 1920s, we can be sexist and racist with each other because we're in the 1920s, and nobody gets offended because that's kind of the way we are. We're sweet guys, all fabulous folks. None of them are racists, but
I can attest to that for the ones that I have met.
And so, but if we're in New York City, and we're in Harlem and we're white characters, we role play accurately.
Yeah, I mean it's part of the. I started to read the Lancer rules, and one of the first things in that rule book is like, this is a dystopian future world where utopia exists but is being constantly fought against, and here's the disclaimer that there is racism and injustice and all of this, and it's not meant to glorify it, but it is part of the world. So
Right. So that was like role and story fit. That's when I'm making a character. That's where I'm at. And then my motivations have also changed, right? Oh, I didn't talk 1990s. I skipped motivation. Gosh. So in the 90s, my characters were more about growth, connection, and power.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of that World of Darkness stuff is personal growth. You know, dealing with the fact that I lost my temper and shredded my administrative assistant secretary, and now I have to go hire a new secretary. Well, first I have to hire cleaners to clean all the blood off the walls, and then I have to go hire a new secretary. So growth, and then those games. A lot of those games I played online in the mud mucks modality. So this is pre World of Warcraft. You'd sign in through the internet at in the 1990s version of the internet and kind of play over text chat. So
Cool.
a lot of those character, a lot of that time was spent like connecting with other players and connecting with other PCs in the world and that kind of thing. For the tens, my motivation is more story. Like, what's the story we're trying to tell, and where is this character? How can this character contribute to that? And then as far as influences go, right? Lovecraft, Marcus Heights, that's the dwarves.
Yep.
Books. Okay. R.A. Salvatore.
Classic.
And then Jules Verne, Lisa Smedman. I think Lisa comes later. Yeah, so we'll see. We'll leave Lisa off for this one. But some of my best characters in this group, YH3A1 was an NPC, but he was fabulous. Paranoia. We were playing Paranoia, and he became that NPC that the party. I mean, he came in to mop up a spill. That was it. I made this NPC. They were gonna walk in. They were gonna clean something and walk out. And the whole purpose of that character was kind of motivating the party, because if you don't do well in Paranoia, you can get demoted to an infrared citizen instead of a red citizen. And I was trying to show the party, like, this yellow citizen is bossing you around and they're kind of an a-hole, but you really want to pay attention to them because you don't want to wind up like that guy. And that guy turned into like, where's Ye? We haven't seen Ye today. So then I'd have to give Ye a job. I mean, it got to the point where the party was actually making messes to see if Ye would show up or if they would send a scrub bot to clean the mess.
Oh, that's fun.
But you know, it was a lot of fun, and so I gave Ye a couple of jobs. Like, he was supposed to hang up a poster that the computer had printed off for him, and the computer had only given him 3 pieces of tape. So he was taping. He would tape the top left corner, and then he would tape the top right corner, and then he would tape the bottom right corner, and then he would take the tape off the top left corner and tape the bottom left corner. And so they're like, "Yay, what are you doing?" It's like, "I'm taping up the poster." And then it was
poor Ye.
Yeah, poor Ye. And then I made Giuseppe for 7th Sea, was a Vadace explorer, pirate, rake, and that was a blast. He was a ton of fun to play. And then we get to today, right? The 20s, and same thing. I'm still fitting into stories, but now I'm also kind of at the point after 40 years where I'll sit down and think about what haven't I played, right? Del Rey is my first bard in 25 years.
Nice.
And then I played Steps on Tail, was a Tabaxi monk. He was my first monk in almost 30 years.
Dang.
Yeah, so there's some character classes I play. I don't think I've ever played a druid. I've never played a warlock. Neither one of those kind of fits. I never tell a story
Interesting.
about being in the woods and that kind of thing, and I don't tell I don't do warlocks for whatever reason. But anyway, um,
What
and,
about barbarians? Seems
uh,
unlike you, but I don't know.
I think my last barbarian was probably 35 years ago.
Dang.
It was probably in the 80s, in the mid to late 80s.
Interesting.
But yeah, so that's I look back at my list of characters, the ones that were memorable and I had fun, and it's like or I look through the rule book and go, I've never played that. I've never been uh, an inquisitor. I've never been an alchemist. Let me try that. Um, so that's kind of where I'm at now. As far as motivation goes, it's still story driven, although now I'm kind of in this what would that character do next? So I try to put myself in their headspace and go, yeah, if I'm a Smurfdeblin who's used to luxury and I don't have it anymore, let's get some money and get some luxury. And so that's kind of what's driving her. And then as far as influences go, um, Jules Verne's still there. I reconnected with Fritz Lieber after several years. I went back and started reading all the Fritz Lieber stuff again.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm trying to broaden my fantasy genres. So I picked up Lisa Smedman's War of the Spider Queen. I also started reading Mercedes Lackey because out at Gen Con, was it Gen Con or Origins? No, it was Gen Con. I started talking to folks about a role play game called Blue Rose, and I learned that there is a whole genre of fantasy literature, fantasy romance, which is very different from what I think of. Like when we talk about high fantasy and low fantasy, right? I'm thinking Lord of the Rings, Lankmar, right? You're either in Middle Earth or you're schlepping around in a fantasy urban setting, trying to make ends meet. And then I found that there are several authors in this genre, so I started picking up the Mercedes Lackey is one of the founding mothers of that movement, and they're actually very good. I was the story hooked me. There was minimal violence in the actual story itself, but it was
it's a romance tale, right? So
and the thing was, it wasn't like syrupy, schlocky, Harlequin. You're probably too young to remember Harlequin romances, but that was a very popular. Harlequin's a publisher. They publish these very, they're basically for housewives in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s.
Sure, like that version of today's 50 Shades of Grey or something.
Something like that, yeah. But it was always, it's a nice guy, and there's a young lady, there's the Mary Sue, right? Is that archetype, right? The average gal, and the handsome stranger comes into town and does something nice for them, and they hit it off, and they have some dates, and it's very kind of romantic and fun. It wasn't like that.
Okay.
There were elements of building a relationship. There was a story that people were trying. There was a good side and a bad side, and the folks from the good side had things that they were trying to accomplish, and the folks from the bad side were trying to stop them. But it didn't. I'm trying to think. No, yeah, that very very few times did anything ever devolve into like fisticuffs. It was always like, oh, one of the stories was about a bard, a young lady who plays a fiddle, and it's like, hey, you're not allowed to play on this street corner, and then she gets a bunch of friends to help her, like, gain legitimacy to play on the street corner. It's very kind of relationship buildy. It was very different. It was very interesting, having come from Lord of the Rings, and where everything gets solved at the point of a sword. It was just it was refreshing, actually.
No, it sounds interesting. I came across a term months ago when I was exploring some aspects of how I was writing adventures. It comes from Japanese, I think, and the term is Kisho Tenketsu, which is to say a 4-act narrative or plot without conflict. So, like, if you look at any American movie in the past however long, you've got, main character, protagonist, antagonist. There's some conflict that they build up to a resolution and a climax. Like, that's sort of how we get taught narrative writing in the West. But exploring this, again, it's Kisho Tenketsu, was kind of interesting to making those adventures and quests that aren't necessarily go here, beat up a guy, go back and talk to the person who asked you to beat him up. Like, just to put a break in that sort of regular gameplay loop. So when you say refreshing, that's totally what triggered in my mind.
And
Very
that,
cool.
I mean, and that takes, I mean, that's, I shoot up way more time than I thought I would, but that's kind of where we're at here. Now, the question I wanted for you, because you haven't been at this as long.
No.
Have you noticed changes in your play style?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you knew me when you were the one who taught me roleplay games. So, like earlier today, you sent me that email of what I'm pretty sure was my first character sheet ever. And it was a human cavalier. So, that was sort of how I got my start. The whole knight in shining armor, sort of classic, like Disney prince kind of character. And as soon as I figured out how things worked mechanically, so in the 2000s there, playing like World of Warcraft, it was clerics and paladins for me for the longest time. I liked mechanically to have that versatility, to be sort of a hybrid class, and I hated dying. I wanted to have all of the things that I could do to stop myself or others from dying. That felt super powerful. And I still do that in lots of RPG video games that I play. I will play a healer class or a hybrid healer, just because I really enjoy the value that has, and feeling like you're saving lives. But since definitely in terms of tabletop RPGs, I mean, I have a paladin who I ran as a NPC in this latest arc for certain parts of it, but otherwise I haven't, sat down and played a cleric or paladin myself at a table. Oh shoot, I can't say that either, because I am playing an Oathbreaker paladin in Thornton's alternative games. So I am still playing them, but I'm playing them very differently.
Yeah.
And I've explored other things. The last thing that I played that was, pretty unique past Osric, who I've talked about on the show before, was a gnome alchemist, a Pathfinder character, whose name was Oxford Winchesterton Fieldville. And he was this kooky alchemist gnome with a half-burnt eyebrow and a tail that he keeps tucked up under his kilt when he can help it. That was the result of a mutation from a failed experiment. But that's definitely out of the range of anything that I had played before. And I still try to. I've been exploring more with rangers and rogues. The 5e character that I have played most recently beyond Osric myself is a half-orc lady ranger named Kansif Dusttread, who is a dual-wield hand-axe ranger, kind of inspired from playing a ranger in Neverwinter a little bit. Which, again, is the video game reference, but is pretty different from what I had played in the past, especially because Neverwinter Rangers don't have a lot of that utility. They don't have a lot of tankiness, and they don't have a lot of healing, so playing that raw DPS was never something that I really enjoyed, but I did. So I'm exploring different things. And probably much to your surprise, since you know me and you said it on the episode. I think it was the episode we had Thornton on, that if you want to mess with John in a D&D game, you throw some Yuan Ti in there, because I have an aversion to snakes. But interestingly enough, when Osric either dies in the alt game or I decide to move on from playing him, my next character lined up is a Yuan Ti sorcerer, which is very out of the norm for me.
A Yuan Ti pureblood or a half-breed?
Pureblood.
Okay.
Sorcerer, which I don't tend to play raw deeps, like raw magic damage dealers. I wouldn't have thought to play a snake, but I thought about it, and I saw a picture of one on the Reddit, actually. And I was like, what if? And I started doing sort of what you do. I draw from whatever I'm reading or watching at the time. But lately I've been drawing from a lot of world lore. I'm homebrewing my universe of Ados for 8 years now, and there is enough world lore that I've created that now I can go back and refer to things and use those to build my characters. So I don't know that I went down exactly the same list as you had, but I knew it was a character that I was designing it as a second character for the alt game. So I knew I wouldn't be playing it super often. I could, experiment with something weird that I, might not want to spend so much time with. And then my narrative flashback, or my connection with canon, is, the how do they fit in with my world? Even though they're about to be whisked into another one, I've built up all this lore that I am deeply immersed in, and how do they fit? So Jathis, the Yuan Ti sorcerer, is a black pureblood Yuan Ti who is a noble, really, though he was shunned or removed from his kingdom for whatever reason. And he will go back and he will start the revolution to claim his rightful place as the ruler of that tribe. And I imagine him as being pretty neutral evil, very selfish, not mindful of life. If he needs to kill somebody because they're in his way, he's the king and he will do so. So I've been branching out into sort of evil characters a little bit more, because I think that sort of stretches, my comfort zone, having played paladins and clerics for so long. I think for as long as I can remember, the driving force for my characters has been story or narrative. Like, I've always wanted to be, the hero or the villain or the something, right? And my motivations, I don't know that I can divide them by decade, because to say I've been playing for 2 decades would be stretching it a little bit.
Just a little.
A little. I think I was 6 or 7 when we started, so maybe this year.
Maybe.
But my motivations for developing characters has always been the characters' motivations. And since college, I majored in psychology, so I really like looking at it from that perspective. And I'm going to take this time to do the plug for redhoodiegames5.wordpress.com, because I've got an assortment of character concepts posted over there, who are characters who have their backstories in my world of Ados. And so the first character concept there is for Herod Mathros, the Mushroom Paladin, who is a paladin who was an ambassador to an elvish kingdom, and after having spent so much time with druids and their lore and their religion, he went to explore a glade that paladins sort of looked over because it wasn't evil, and druids had all sorts of curiosity about simply because it was unknown. And he ended up sort of, I don't know if mechanically he's a multi-class between a paladin and a druid or what, but it sort of fundamentally changed him. And then I've got characters that are like Oldriska Cerny, the Mantis, who is a young woman assassin rogue. Maybe she's a duelist rogue, actually, who was pretty violently abused in her adolescence and turned into a rogue vigilante justice keeper so that she could go and stop and just murder men who were abusing women, basically. Hence the title, the Mantis, because she beheads the men who are trying to have inappropriate relations with their women. So I think that I have started diversifying my characters quite a lot. And when I think about how I'm going to build, what my perfect PC looks like, I don't know that I have had many PCs that I haven't felt really connected to in one way or another, or that I couldn't find myself playing and really enjoying. But since I have that psychology background, I analyze all of my characters quite a bit. So picking the race and class is neat, but I don't do that first. I do sort of what you do. I build the story first. Who are they as a child? Were they magical or non-magical? What were their friends and families like? How were they treated? What sort of trauma have they experienced, and did it result in stress or growth? And what other key events in their life have contributed to who they are at the time that I would start playing them? And I think some of that is sort of my knowledge of human mechanics, in that if you have a better connection with the wisdom, intelligence, charisma, the mental stats of your character, because you can roleplay those at the table, but you can't really roleplay your character's strength, dex, or con while you're like sitting at the table. So getting into the mental stats and the personality of a character is pretty important. And if you can do that well, then I would call that, a relatively perfect PC, more so than one that you've spent a lot of time on, or one that you whipped up, or even a pre-built. But if you can get into it and be excited about playing that character, that's sort of my, not line for perfect, but that's a pretty good bar to try to achieve.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So we should probably get on with the show.
Yeah, I mean, that was...
we've answered the question.
Maybe we should do questions at the end. I thought maybe we could weave a little bit more in here, but that's okay. We can always change the title a little bit too.
Sure.
But we were going to talk a little bit about handling bad rolls, because it came up on an earlier show where you described a character botching some roll in a tavern so that they caught their shoe or pant leg on a nail in the floor and fall down, and they failed, but it led to something. So that's sort of how we got the idea, and we've had some interesting discussion in the patron Discord. So you had some interesting stuff to say, so I'm gonna let you say it.
Okay, so where this comes from, and we talked a little bit about fudging rolls, right? Last show was all about, oh crap, I rolled this and it's really gonna derail the story, or it's gonna kill the character, right? And it's just, that's not the story we want to have at the table. Let's fix that by changing the outcome of the dice. This is more subtle, and it's something went wrong, or something you didn't pass a test. What happens? And I guess for me, this kind of goes back to something I read. I can't remember the source. I think it was one of Shannon Appleklein's books. But Gary Gygax was writing about the D&D combat system, and he said it's an abstraction. So, right, if you're a human and you've leveled up and you have 90 hit points, it doesn't mean you can be stabbed in the chest 37 times before you die.
Carl, that kills people.
It does kill people, but your 90 hit points, it represents your fighting prowess, and you know where to put your feet, and you know how to roll with a blow. So instead of getting cut deeply and injured, you get a nick or a scratch. And as the damage is dealt to the character, it's wearing you out. You're getting tired. Um, you're getting scratched up. You're losing a little bit of blood here and there, and you're getting bruised and sore. You might stretch a muscle, parrying the dagger one too many times, and then eventually the knife comes in and stabs you in the chest. You really only get stabbed in the chest once,
Maybe twice.
maybe twice.
Barbarians take a lot. They get hit a lot, but it's yeah.
But that's, if the barbarian was sound asleep and you took a knife and jammed it into his throat, he dies. And that's kind of, I've always liked that, and I'm always kind of looking for that in my groups, instead of kind of yep, you hit him, roll for damage. Yep, you hit him, roll for damage. Okay, cool. We've and we've said it a couple times at the table. It's like, hey, on a scale of 0 to 48, how damaged would you say that character looks, right? Because we all know, that guy just got 48 hit points, and we're metagaming a little bit. But I look at checks and tests and throws and skill contested rolls, whatever the mechanic is. I look at those in the same kind of light. Like, if my character is going to be sneaky, it isn't like, okay, I'm trying to sneak into town so the guards won't see me. I'm going to look for a way to sneak in, and there's some shadows over there, and there's some shadows over there. Okay, roll the dice. Yep, you were sneaky. You sneak in. Or, oh, you weren't sneaky. Now what do you want to do? It's like, well, that's not really what's going on here.
Right.
If you're crouching down and trying to stay with the shadows and not step on any twigs and not knock anything off of shelves and not bump into anybody and get where you're trying to go, when you make the roll, right, there's a target number, or what's CR, challenge rating?
Yep.
So you've got to get over a certain threshold
the DC
succeed.
is the skill check ones. That's
right.
The die check, I think.
The die check,
means.
yeah. So difficulty.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah. So and lots of different games have these mechanics, but for me, it's like if your character is gonna do this, you're gonna commit to it.
Yeah.
And you roll, and if the roll comes up bad, I, as a DM, always like to throw in something that happens in the game space that makes that failure manifest itself, right? It
right.
isn't
you did something. It's not right. You didn't do it.
You took an action. Your planned outcome didn't happen. You still crouched down and right. I mean, I'm having flashbacks of The Office, right, when Michael Scott is low crawling out of his office so people in the conference room can't see him. Everybody else in the office sees him, right?
Yes.
He's not being stealthy. He failed his stealth roll.
Yep. No, that's a good way to think of it. You as soon as you began to talk about it in terms of abstraction, I think that is something that a lot of newer DMs probably don't think about quite as much, because in terms of the stealth roll, you've got the long shadow on the left side of the hallway and sort of a short flickering shadow on the right side. But maybe if you can wait a minute, that torch will burn out because the guard is standing on the left, and it'd be better if you could go to the right. But I think a lot of, especially for stealth mechanics, where if we're I don't love it, but I think we get a lot of inspiration from video games, and stealthing in video games is like turning magically invisible most of the time, which is not how stealthing in like 5e works, for example. And so thinking of it as that abstraction, I think, is a really helpful way for newer DMs to really know what that means when a player does a skill check or attempts to do something that merits a check like that.
I mean, and I've been playing a bard a lot, so I've been making a lot of performance rolls. And it's like, if I fail a performance roll, I got up, I sang. My bard has a high charisma. She's a level 7 bard. She obviously knows how to sing. It isn't, you get on stage and you get all hoarse and start coughing and you can't sing. It's you
They
picked the
don't
wrong.
like you.
They don't like you're singing to, I'm a gnome, so I'm a soprano. It's like, they weren't expecting such a high pitched singer. You picked the wrong song, right? You're singing a sea shanty.
Oh, sure.
And because you sang a sea shanty last time you were singing at this place, and it was full of sailors and men at arms. And oh, look, it's the pilgrims who are on a pilgrimage to a holy site stopped in, and they don't like your body sea shanty. They wanted something a little bit more reserved. So
yeah, you give a narrative reason for the failure and not just say, oh, it doesn't work.
Right.
And sometimes you get, sometimes even I think sometimes we get caught up on like natural 1s and natural 20s too, where I had the bard in my group roll a very high performance check when he was attempting to perform for a previously uncontacted race of rodent folk. And he was playing a lute, and they had never heard that, and their music is not like that. And even though the performance was very good, that's not something that they would culturally appreciate. And so I didn't give him a you fail, but I gave him a the rat covers his ears and starts screeching, no sings, no songs, because he didn't like it.
Right. And I think for new DMs, there might be, what are the hurdles, right? So if you're a new DM, you might lack a little bit of confidence, and you might worry that your players are going to
expect something different,
or they're going to quibble, right?
Right.
So
I got an 18 on the stealth. Why can't I get past this guy?
Well,
it's like you got the 18, but it's midday.
20. Right. It's midday. It's the natural siesta time for the town, so there's nobody on the streets except for the guards. They're bent out of shape that they're not taking a nap, so guess what they're doing? They're looking to jack people up at the gate. And they rolled a natural 20 on their observation roll. So, yeah, you rolled an 18, they rolled a 20, they see you. And that's that quibbling thing is there. And then there's the risk that the where did I put that? I'm checking my notes here. There's the risk that the players are going to use whatever you put into the game to go off the rails, right? So if you fail the stealth roll, like you're trying to leave the party without being noticed, right? You've got the information that you want from the marquee. The waltzes are starting, and you're like, we're done. I'm not going to dance. I don't want to dance and get drunk. I have to take this information and deliver it to my contact. And so you're trying to leave the party unobserved, and you bump into a waiter and spill a tray of drinks. Right.
Steve Martin.
Yeah. You could worry that your party is going to all of a sudden, blame the waiter and whip out a dagger and, start a fight. And traditionally you have to think about what your group is doing, but a lot of times players won't do that, right? If you put a MacGuffin in there and it's clearly a MacGuffin, right? It's you bumped into the waiter and he spilled some drinks. He dropped the tray, the champagne glasses smash. A bunch of people turn and look, and hey, there's Giuseppe, why is he by the door? Why does he have his coat on? Is he leaving already? No, stay. They might have to stay a little bit longer at the party, and that'll cause the story to go off the rails. I don't think the story will go off the rails, right?
No, I mean you make it work, right?
Right.
I don't know that I would ever. And part of this comes down to, if you're homebrewing or if you're using a module, be aware of these. We talked about them a little bit, but like the game breaking rolls where you fail that one really important check to get out of there, and now all of a sudden people are like, wait, why was Giuseppe here? What's going on? And now all of a sudden there's all this suspicion that there never should have been, which I think for a DM, it's hard to hand wave that because you're not really hand waving it. You have to come up with something on the fly as to why is that Marquis now not going to investigate him? Like, where's the group of people who stop him on the docks and are like, hey, why'd you bounce? What's going on? And that's, I think confidence is one of those things, like you said.
And just take a pause. I mean, if you need to, I'm a planner, right? Flowcharter. Think it out, right? You're the Montaigne Marquis. You've got 200 people in your estate. You've been planning this affair for a month, right?
At least
huge outlay of cash for the string quartet and the food. There's people you want to talk to. Are you going to stop this whole party and cause a massive social scene because one Vodace sailor broke some glasses? Maybe not, right? Probably not.
Maybe not.
Right? And if the party, they're going to try and do something grandiose and party breaking, that's where as a GM I'd kind of call a timeout with the party. Break. Let's talk about what's going to happen. You guys are thinking about turning this into an action combat scene. It was a social scene. If you do that, it's going to this.
Nope, you're roboting out on us again.
Change where the story.
So you were talking about how taking a break from the interaction and discussing with your players that it will, the results of their attempted skill check are going to change the nature of the scene, and that's
right. And
that's where we gotcha.
And not necessarily I guess for a new DM, the fear and trepidation comes from what's the party going to do next? Now that you've failed or botched this stealth check, or failed or botched even a friendship roll, like trying to do a persuasion roll or check. If they don't succeed, they're going to get violent, or if they don't succeed, they're going to go do something else, and they're going to leave they're going to leave the rails and go be lost and not get what's going on in the game.
And it takes away from what you have prepared as a DM, because if your plan was for them to stay at the party for some time, or for them to rendezvous with an NPC who is like, you've got to meet me on the docks in an hour or I'm leaving without ya. Like if you've set yourself up into and again, this is, if you're homebrewing something, try to avoid those game breaking roll checks, or maybe that time constraint is important and that will change the story in a way that you weren't prepared for. But if your players are still interested, then maybe that makes a more compelling story, or it makes the players feel more like they have an impact on the story. So even those moments,
more agency, right?
Yes,
and that's where I like break. Let's come out of character. Let's talk about where we want the story to go. If you miss the meeting with the spy on the docks, you still have to get that information to Queen Elaine. Now this is gonna turn into a sea race. So the guy at the docks is gonna take bad information to Queen Elaine, and now you've got to race the bad information across the ocean to get back to Avalon to save the day. Is that the kind of, are we good with that? And if everyone's like, yep, we're good with that, then okay, everybody back into character and let's press on.
So I feel like I don't. All right, so I don't want this to cause a whole big thing because I don't want us to go on for too long here. But I don't like that as a solution.
No?
As a DM, nor for a player. Because as a player, I tried my absolute hardest not to metagame, and as a DM, I am not about to spark metagaming in the way that would. Like if you are, so you've just knocked over the glasses by the waiter at the door with your coat on, and your other group members are dancing with the marquee to keep him distracted, and somebody else is waiting outside. Like if the party is split up and ready to go, there's no way they'd be able to talk about what's going to happen. That party member who's dancing with the marquee is going to have to do something drastic to try to get him to not pay attention at the moment. Or if he does, they'll have to roll their own stealth check to try to disappear quickly so as to not further arouse suspicion. But as a DM, okay, I would improv right away and make all of the decisions from that point. Just narrative choices. Like you can't have a conversation with your teammates right now. Like it's not possible. So what do you do? And we'll deal with the consequences of it.
Okay. No, that's totally, well, that feeds into my last point, which is there are some times when I just don't roll. And we haven't had the mathy lesson.
We haven't done the math session yet, but this might be a good foray.
We haven't done the math session. But if you look at, like, okay, I'm a level 11 assassin and I'm sneaking by level 1 guards, right? Your probability of failure is around 5%.
That's a natural 1 on a d20.
A natural 1 on a d20 is 5%.
Because even if you roll a 2 as a level 11 assassin, the least you're going to roll is a 15, so...
Right. And if it's an opposed roll, the guards are going to have, right, they're sleepy, it's nighttime, there's a bunch of negative modifiers. But let's say you roll the natural 1. Well, what's a level 11 assassin going to do to a country bumpkin guard? Probably
murder them?
Either murder them or walk up to them and say, "You didn't see me. If you say
you didn't see
me,
anything. You can't see it, but I'm doing the penguin hands."
Say what again?
What?
But so then you're making an intimidation roll against a level, from a level 11 to a level 1, and you again have a 5% chance of failure. But if you look at that whole span, it's a 0.25% chance of failure that the assassin's going to get into town unobserved or unreported. Why bother rolling at that point?
Right.
The chances are so infinitesimally small. And what's the outcome? It doesn't have a big impact on the story. So
potentially.
But right, it doesn't have a big potential impact on the story. Now, if the guards are looking for this assassin and he's supposed to be arrested on sight, that's a different story. But if this is just I'm out of poison and I need to go steal some from the shop, getting into town silently, I'm not going to make them roll. The theft, I'll probably make them roll for the theft itself,
right?
Because there's more on the line with that. But so there's a lot of times where and I favor systems like 7th C or DCC, where if you say it, you do it. Like you don't need a umpteen million skill check rolls.
Right.
I'm not saying that I don't like. Like I like 5e, I like Pathfinder, I like Starfinder. Rolling skill checks is fun.
I mean, rolling dice is fun, but
rolling dice is fun, sure, and making that skill check can be exciting, but
But do you really need to is the question. And
right.
I think that this is important to bring up too, because a lot of newer DMs make the mistake of over-rolling skill checks, trying to create tension or anticipation where there doesn't necessarily need to be any. So like I walk into the next room. What do I see? Roll a perception check. Be like, I'm in the room. Like, just what do I see? Like, before you even describe anything to me, I'm rolling dice. And, like, even if I roll a natural one, like, what do I, like, take a second to put my finger in my eye and I have to rub some dirt out and then I get to look at the room? Like, do you really need to roll for what they're asking to do? And I think some of it comes down to players too, because some players will ask constantly, can I roll for this? Can I roll for that? And I don't, not that I would prefer that, but I certainly don't mind that, as opposed to players who don't ask to do anything and sort of wait for me to ask for things. Where I think that if like my 5e players all had an experience in 7c where they got to just say, hey, this is what I'm doing, they might do that more in 5e, which would create a more organic experience. Like, hey, I want to get into the shop without people noticing. Okay, you know, it's nighttime. It's not a heavily guarded section of town, or there might not be many guards in town anyway. You get up to the door. Okay, can I roll to pick the lock? That's sort of what I would expect, but if they were used to that sort of narrative, I pick the lock. Be like, okay, turns out it's not locked. Oh, all right. You enter the shop. What do I see? Do I need to roll perception or investigation to find what I'm looking for? Maybe. Are you looking for something really rare? Investigation check. Are you looking to just steal another handful of daggers? They're probably on the shelf. Do you really need to roll is a great question, and players feeling like they have that agency to say, this is what I want to do without anticipating a roll is sort of what makes the roll. When you get told by your DM, make a perception roll, it's like, ooh, now it's something that I might or might not see.
Yeah. And in your example, I'm a huge believer in take the 10 or take the 20.
Okay.
So you're in the shop. It's not locked. It's a rag and bone shop, right? You're in Lankmar. You're in a rag and bone store, which is right. It's just the sundries and leavings of old people who have died. So there's shawls and cloaks and scarves and some canes and a couple of knives and some some pots and pans.
Maybe some artifacts, right?
Maybe there's an interesting artifact in here, but it's dark. No one's going to be by this way for at least 4 hours.
You are the level 11 assassin anyway, so you've got the dexterity to know what you can and can't do by that level.
And if it's like, go look for this, right? I mean, if you get sent to if your mom sent you to the pantry to find rice and you didn't see the rice, what are you going to do?
Well, you keep looking.
You keep looking, right? So that's kind of where that whole take the 10 or take the 20, you roll perception. You didn't see it. Okay. That means you didn't see it right away. Now you're going to spend 2 hours looking.
Sure. Or you get, I think another mistake, maybe mistake that new DMs do is after they you're in the shop, you're looking for that artifact that Mr. Johnson left in his house when he died that some collector wants. You roll the investigation and you get a 2. It's like, well, do I just keep rolling until I get the 10?
Well, so that's a good question. So if you roll it, so let's say.
Well, that's why you would use the take the 10 rule. So I don't know that we've explained what that is, but if you're unfamiliar, many systems have an option to take a 10, which given that you're not making the check in some tense emergent situation, a level 11 assassin in an empty shop on an empty street in the middle of the night is going to be able to, have an average degree of success at looking for a sack of rice. So by taking the 10, you just, you would have an average skill at this. You get a 10 plus your modifiers. Like, what do you get? So that's that rule.
And that just takes time, right? And then take the 20 just takes twice as long as take the 10.
Right. So I want to find the artifact, and I know there's a lot of stuff in this store. I only got a 13 on my investigation. The DC, even though the player might not know it, was a 15. So you wait, 2 hours later, after sort of rummaging around very quietly, very slowly, you do manage to find the little jade idol.
Right.
Yeah,
if they roll a 1,
I like that.
If they botch
I should do that
it,
more.
One of the things that I like to do is they botched it. They found what they think is a jade idol, but it's a soapstone, a green soapstone idol. It's the wrong idol. So that's kind of the difference for me is if you roll that nat 1, you found something. It's not, you think it's the right thing, but it's not.
I would have the nat 1 be, you think you find it and you open the box and it turns out to be like this music or a jack in the box that goes, ha, and now you hear some creaking above, and you, from the stairs, you see the flicker of a candle as somebody shouts down, hello.
That's a good way to do it too.
Now you roll initiative and find out if you have time to make that one more check to find where you're looking for. Look in one more place, roll one more investigation, see if you're lucky enough to find it. And now that roll becomes important, where the roll to get into an unlocked door was not necessary. Although sometimes I do some of those just to let people roll dice. Like if it has been a pretty heavy RP session or there hasn't been a lot of die rolling, sometimes I'll do some of those so that people get to roll more dice and they get a little bit more of that tactile fun.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So we spent, this is pretty half and half. I'm going to have to rename this episode 12 Patron Question / Outcomes for Bad Rolls. But I think we've covered a pretty good... Actually, some of the things that came up were really big for newer DMs. In terms of, how do you... The abstraction that is hit points or skill checks, and how failing isn't just you do it or you don't. Like you said you do it, so what's the outcome? And what happens next, like you said earlier. And taking the 10 and taking the 20. I'm going to have to let my players do that a little bit more, because some of them have some high passive skills, and I don't often use passive skills outside of passive perception, but I might think of that more now as taking the 20. So like, you want to perform well, you spend 10 minutes doing a warm-up, you spend 10 minutes tuning your loot, and a half an hour later you deliver a stirring performance. But the guy that you wanted to perform for has left the tavern. Like, if I need to do narrative things like that, I still can, without taking away that skill that players have, worked pretty hard to obtain.
And failure doesn't have to automatically be a negative. I mean, that's the other thing too that I've been thinking about as we've been talking, is that it didn't go off the way you wanted it to, but that doesn't mean that you necessarily had a massively negative outcome.
Right.
If you go to a show and you don't like the comedian, how many people boo? Like, actually stop the show and start booing? Nobody. I shouldn't say nobody, but it's rare.
Yeah, that's definitely more of a you see it in movies, not in real life thing.
Right, and I'm in the tavern. The bard doesn't meet the target number for their performance check. It's like, she's singing out of tune tonight, or that's no good. Like, the consequence of the roll doesn't have to happen immediately. I guess that's kind of where my mind is going.
Yeah, and it doesn't
Just
have to be drastic either. You know, we think of
Right.
natural 1s and natural 20s being really extreme differences, but a natural 20 on a performance check for somebody who doesn't understand the language you're performing in probably doesn't care. And a natural 1 to an audience of old people who are half-drunk sailors already falling asleep and half the people at the tables are humming anyway, they probably don't care.
Probably don't care. And you, as the player, probably won't get the feedback that you were bad.
Right, which is not something that you want very often as a player anyway.
Well, no, but you go into the tavern, you offer to sing some songs for supper. The bartender, the tavern innkeeper says, sure, go ahead, and you don't hit the target number. So you finish your songs, you sit down at the bar, and the bartender goes, that was interesting, and they hand you a bowl of gruel.
Or worse, a bill.
Right? Well, they said they would, you could sing for your supper, and instead of, a lamb chop, have a delicious lamb chop and a glass of our finest mead, they give you a bowl of oatmeal at 9 o'clock at night. It's like a cold bowl of oatmeal at 9 o'clock at night. Right?
Yeah.
It isn't, you failed and everyone's booing, get off the stage. It's you sang your song, nobody really liked it, and you didn't get the reward you were expecting. So it doesn't have to be. That's basically what I was trying to say.
It doesn't have to be massively negative.
Doesn't have to be immediate. Okay, you failed and boom, this happens. It could be you thought you were doing a good job, you didn't really do a good job, and you're not even going to know about it until later in the game, kind of thing. You get to the next town and you try that. Hey, can I sing for my supper? And it's like, oh no, yeah, the King's Guard stopped by and said that there was a bard in the last town. It's terrible. So you're not that bard, are you? No.
Deception check.
And you passed. Oh, good. Thank God you're not that bard. We wouldn't want them singing here. Go ahead, have a sing. Have a sing song.
And now perform with disadvantage while you are disparaged.
Yeah, you're sad.
You're nervous. There's one thing that I want to bring up that I saw on a Reddit post, and we talked about hit points as an abstraction. And this Reddit post was a reflection of somebody who ran a session without ever using the word miss. So whenever you would miss in combat, you don't. But the narrative description for that is you slam your long sword at the hobgoblin, but he manages to raise his shield in time. Shing! The sword goes arcing across the shield. Thinking about hit points in an abstraction, having it not be that binary hit or miss, I think can really help that, because you could hit, right, and still hit the shield, but the way that you've hit it causes that hobgoblin to strain his arm, and I think some of that is just comes down to how much the confidence of the DM to narrate the situation as opposed to acting as the just the mechanical aspects of the world.
The mechanics lend themselves to that kind of, because you roll a to hit, and then you roll damage, and it's natural. Like, I rolled a good to hit. I hit him. Yes, you hit him. I rolled high on my to hit. I must have hit him really well. Not really. You hit them. Right. And then you roll damage. Wow, I rolled max damage. I put my sword through his head. It's like, it's a 90 hit point person. No, yes, you damaged them. You made them.
You worried them.
They have a bruise on their shoulder, or they tore a muscle or you cracked a rib. Like, no,
or it's just tiring them out, lowering their ability to defend themselves until somebody lands that final hit and actually does drive the blade through their chest.
I mean,
But
we
I
could
think
probably have an entire show about how to narrate combat and how to run a combat session. That probably would be a good show, unless it's
maybe
already on the list.
it's not. I just added narrating combat because I think that that's important, and I just opened a can of worms that easily could be an hour-long discussion.
Which we can't do because we're running.
No, we're just
end.
about there. Yeah.
Right.
I think my final thoughts are really embracing that, thinking about it in terms of an abstraction, where your armor class doesn't determine if their weapon connects with you or not. It's possible in a combat their weapon connects with you every time, and your hit points aren't how much blood is in your body. It's
right.
How many times can you get hit. How many times can you block an attack with your shield before you can't raise your shield in time to block anymore? And I think that is probably like, if you're a new DM, that's a big takeaway. It's all a narrative. It's a shared mental experience, and abstraction is a good way to think about it.
And different systems handle it very, very differently.
Oh yeah. We have another deep dive coming up. That's gonna be in two more episodes, and then the next will be the deep dive. We're still talking about what we want it to be, but I'm hoping that those deep dive sessions give people maybe a little bit of a nudge to try a different system and see how that plays out, and see how the narrative style or the narrative expectations of a DM or GM mesh with the way that they prefer to run the game. Do you want combat to be really fast-paced with, okay, you hit, you miss, you do this damage, you don't do this damage? Or do you want it to be very narrative and drawn out? I think that'll be a good one. Do you have any closing thoughts on handling poor rolls?
I do not.
I think that you have added quite a lot of insight, and your answer to the patron question was pretty great. I got some stuff out of that too. So I hope that our listeners do, and I hope our patron enjoys that. So that's going to do it for Set the Table episode 12. I've already plugged redhoodiegames5.wordpress.com. Go check that out for tabletop content you can use at home. And if you want to support us any more than just listening, or if you want to have a question asked and answered in depth like we just did, head on over to patreon.com/Skoda, where for even $1 you can join us on the patron Discord and chat. So we will see you next time. Thanks very much.
Good day, eh?